Okay, I have pulled you into chat. I assume you're good to go. What do you disagree with me about?
Yeah, so I saw your thing on Twitter. I don't know if you
Oh,
took that as
thank God you have a nice mic. Okay,
yeah. I know I stream myself, so
good.
yeah, I respect good audio quality. Yeah, I didn't I wasn't trying to come off as hostile initially. If you perceived it that way, sorry, but I didn't. So the
That's
point
fine.
that I was initially trying to make was you were talking about like central planning and socialism, right?
I was talking about how you don't need central planning in socialism, but yeah,
Sure, sure. Yeah, I was just talking about the general topic, not that you inherently
sure.
like initially supported or anything. But my understanding is that you're a market socialist, right? Or that you want to
No,
see that
well,
in the
okay.
next term?
So the idea here is taking steps, and
Sure,
it's just pragmatism, really. I
sure.
guess I guess at the heart of it, it's where do you consider yourself? Am I dealing with in what reality do you live? Is pretty much where I got to know where we exist, so I know how to interact with you.
Yeah.
Because you said I
So
misinterpreted you earlier, so that's fine.
yeah, yeah. So on like Twitter, it kind of like I consider myself a SocDem.
Okay,
And probably to give some context, I see some people asking in chat. Yeah. So yeah, actually, it's not even worth addressing. So
like
basically,
shoe
yeah.
on head sort of beliefs.
I don't really follow shoe on head as much.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I would define like I want to see an increasement of worker co-ops in society.
Sure.
But I'm not a big fan of like outlawing or like outlawing the usage of like private capital and like being able to privately own parts of a firm.
Right, that would be a little bit further than market socialism, I think, but yeah.
Um, so at least the way that I set this up is market socialism. Um, the point to actually get to that point would be to mandate that all firms become worker co-ops in that sense, and that's kind of where I take an issue. That was my understanding of where your position was, because when I mentioned
Okay.
that, I think you replied with like you don't know what words mean, and I think you may have thought that was coming off as hostile, but I was just trying to preface it like if we engage in this, that's what I believe. So yeah,
I see. Okay. Because it was in a conversation with someone who actually
sure.
doesn't know anything about it, and the context of that was basically um, coming from pure ignorance into a question that didn't really make a ton of sense because
Mhm.
you don't because it's not necessitated. You know what I'm saying? Chat wants pronouns. What do you got?
Sure, it's he him.
All right, cool. Me too. So basically the idea here is I'm not necessarily for forcing anything. What I am for is even when I was talking about it was literally just the person talking because the conversation was about socialism specifically, not what I advocate we move towards. So the specific situation was socialism, in which case he's like, "Oh, you can't own things like a PlayStation 5 or whatever." And I was like, "Yeah, there's a difference between private and personal property," and we tried to talk about that. And then I was like, wouldn't you like a situation under capitalism where you could make more money as a worker, right? And then Amazon comes up all the time in these conversations. And it's a good example of making sure that you can redistribute wealth properly to the people that create the wealth, right? And that's a sort of a movement towards that. I've talked before where I don't think you need to mandate co-ops in every single situation. It happens to manifest when, and I don't know at what level you would consider this, but I use the like a small bakery as the standard by which I determine this. Like the person who is the baker, the person with all the skill, and clearly we want to compensate people that have higher levels of skill. That doesn't necessarily have to be a one-to-one co-op where you have like two or three employees, right? As long as they're treated ethically as we determine by law, whatever that might be. So it doesn't have to be a forced co-op. It just seems like at a certain size, you don't have an ethical business without a co-op. I don't know what that size necessarily is,
Mhm.
but you see, like I don't know when you start to get in the millions of dollars, it becomes pretty quick. The ones at the top don't you know don't treat the employees ethically is usually what happens.
Okay. So you kind of laid out your position. Okay, so here's the part where I tend to disagree,
Sure.
right? Um, So I used to be a really big fan, just to give some context, I used to be a fan of like after a certain amount of people, you start to like mandate co-ops. So like you mentioned like millions of dollars, just as like an example, right?
Sure.
I guess the issue that I take apart with is that in our current society, it seems like that's not a very effective or like practical way of engaging with like worker co-ops for a couple of reasons, and I can go into those specifically.
Sure.
One being that it's extremely difficult, I would say, with the logistics of it, right? How do you redistribute the capital that was put in initially by like owners, right? Do you just give that directly back to like workers in and of itself? If there are shares in the stock market, what do you do about the stock market? What do you do about all the foreign capital that comes in exchanges? And when that does happen, when you end up like taking away all that capital and then redistributing it to workers, who does it, right? Is it
Who
federal
does?
government, which
Oh, I
who
see.
does the actual like redistributing of capital, right?
Right.
The majority of plans that I've seen about it tend to come from Sweden. I don't remember the guy's name, but Sweden had like a couple like 20, 30 years ago, had like a sort of socialist left wing, and their whole plan to engage with like worker co-ops was that they were going to take like all of the stock that was put into like Swedish firms and let the federal government reorganize that and give it to like specific worker co-ops. Now, in this sense, that is a form of central planning. And I don't know if
Sure.
I'd be in favor of something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably also a little inefficient because it's moving the money to a place it doesn't need to go to come back. Basically, it'd be ideally a situation where you start a business, and usually left policies like this, where you start talking about labor and the way that we should make sure that different people can have different things. This is when you still have forms of capitalism going on, which is the idea here, right? Because without capitalism going on, there's no really need for this. And so what it tends to manifest in when you talk about it is there are just hierarchies within society. Like someone, you like to use the example of LeBron James or someone like I can't do his job and other people can't do mine, and other people can't do yours and whatever. And that's kind of the point, right? Like it's about making sure that if you have an aptitude for something, I'm fine with being compensated more for having a high aptitude with something, as long as there's as little exploitation as we can get out of it. Really, the idea here is, first of all, the stock market in general is not super beneficial to any of this. That's a problem that would slowly have to be tackled in general by. There's so much that goes into that it would have to be a bunch of other different policies that happen. Taxing billionaires would be a good start, in the way that we don't tax them enough. But really, as far as how the workers were able to get paid, I guess, you take it from the just what happens at the business, right? So Amazon, you could do it. I mean, you have to pay everybody a certain amount in increments that we agree are acceptable. But if you have UBI, this is even easier. You could do quarterly. You could do quarantine's management. You could do quarterly. You could do weekly. You could do monthly. It just depends. As long as it comes from the profit of the company that everyone generated together, and within that, because you're collectively bargaining, because you are part of a co-op, because everybody has a say in the way it's run, you have discussions about how that works. And we see this pretty successfully working within co-op companies. This works pretty well. That also works pretty well in places with unions, although unions have a lot of different hurdles, because they're still cool with the way the corporate structure kind of works. They just want a separate thing for the workers. It's kind of like proto co-ops. So I mean, it doesn't really need to go to the federal government first, because that's not how companies pay their employees anyway. Like it doesn't filter through the government and then filter back into the company that filters down to the worker. They pay you out of the profit they make, and then they take whatever's left and then get taxed on that. The problem is that usually the people that are in charge of that decision take too much, and that's the point. So you pay them surplus value. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I get all that aspects.
Hmm.
Like my issue isn't necessarily with the microeconomics, with the inter-firm structure, but rather with the way that we actually handle this on a macro level.
Okay.
So yeah. So this is like I mentioned, right? Like I think worker co-ops are cool. I think membership co-ops are cool. I think we
Hmm.
probably need to expand them. There are certain benefits, right? And even with unions, I think those are great too. They tend to have like a very beneficial aspect in society. But my issue is necessarily what happens when capital, right? Like ownership in firms is redistributed, right? So you mentioned stock market, and you like that's really complicated. It is, right? It's extremely
Right. You have to
complicated.
unentwine
Yeah.
yourself from the traditional structure and lattice of capitalism and how it operates. Um, Obviously, for multiple reasons, it's not really working that well, and there needs to be. My goal for America for the next 100 years, roughly, is that there is basically strong socialism. We take businesses that ethics are super strong in, that you would want to base the business around ethics, right? We call them business, call it enterprise, call it whatever you want, but right now they're businesses. Hospitals, education, policing, prisons, drugs, stuff like that. If it's ethics based, which those are, they don't have profit motive. If you could start there, you can start unentwining the way that we deal with capital in these markets, right? And that naturally leads to a less entwined stock market with the way that people interact with that, if that makes sense. I mean, think of some of the largest stock, like Dow, for instance. They deal in a lot of shit, but chemistry is a big one. I live in Michigan, so Dow Chemical is not too far from here. It's in Midland, Michigan, if no one knows, and it's over here, and they do a lot of different stuff. But there's just, because they have their fingers in so much, you have this situation where if you start chipping away at the apparatus through just socializing different aspects of our economy, it just naturally untangles itself. It's really hard to just pick any one thread and do it. It has to be a systemic thing that slowly changes. That's why I disagree with revolutionaries. And I understand that we live in a society that, like, we have very easy things. I can pick up my phone and get satisfied to pretty much any need I have if I have the money for it, right? And even sometimes you don't even need money to get satisfied for these things. And so we have a very, very quick turnover insofar as what we want, what and what when we get it. And so this feels particularly sluggish for a group of people that live on the internet like we do. But I don't agree that we need to just flip the government in a revolution today, because it'll harm more people, especially people that need this structure to survive. Disabled people are chiefly among them. But I don't know. Am I not answering a specific question within that?
Yeah, yeah. So I think like we're kind of like moving around the point. So
I
my
guess.
whole yeah. So the thing is like you mentioned like getting like detwined from like the stock market, for example, right?
Sure.
That's not
Part of it.
something, as you mentioned, is like really simple, and
Of
like
course not.
that doesn't even necessarily address like the actual point, right? So firms are already engaged in the market, right?
Hmm.
You already have firms that are public on the
Yes.
stock market, right? What do you do when you mandate co-ops in that sense? Do you
So
redistribute
again,
them?
again, I'm not for immediately mandating co-ops, right? I'm for moving toward co-ops, and then you basically
Okay,
knock
yeah.
it's the domino effect that they worry about in Vietnam, except with just society. It's just a lived thing. So the idea is basically like, you start at places that initially accept co-ops. That's the best place to start. You know what I'm saying? Anybody that wants to be part of a co-op, we strongly incentivize it, bring it up, and say like, hey, this is a really good business model. That's first. You'll get that pretty quickly. But again, you're going to need socialized things in the apparatus prior to that, like the medicine, the education, and stuff like that, to even facilitate these kinds of things in widespread scale. It's all about zeitgeist, really, because you need people to want to do that, and when they see the benefits of doing that in their workplace. I make more money working at an Amazon co-op than I do working under Jeff Bezos, making billions and billions of dollars with my labor. Sure, I don't understand how capitalists can say billionaires earn their money, but I can definitely see how they generate their money. Um, like, there has to be a situation where you're talking about capping personal income and personal wealth, which is a hard discussion that you're going to have with capitalists. But you have to have it, otherwise just there's nothing to go around unless you want massive inflation because you're still dealing in a capitalist market. To specifically address the how do you eventually mandate a co-op, at a certain point there will be holdouts eventually somewhere down the line, right? Because, and this has happened before, like this isn't, I know this might sound, I don't know, like funny, I guess, but like when robber barons and stuff were around, there were literally just labor riots and labor laws that were passed and lots of debates about it, and then they passed that, and then they changed fundamentally how labor functions in industrialized society. This is not a new thing. This happens constantly. We still have labor issues all the time. Every fucking day we talk about labor and how to change it and how to make it better for working class people all the time. This is just another function. It's just another step of it, and all that basically needs to happen is you disincentivize it from whatever perspective you want. If you know, it's Dow Chemical, well, you can easily have, because of free markets and how they work, what you can do is you can either dissolve that business through financial compensation. That's a way to do it. The federal government has done that before. Specifically, fiber optics is a great example of that. They contracted out private things, but the federal government actually owns the fiber optic cables, stuff like that. I mean, there's just so many ways to accomplish it. It's hard to like really nail down how to do it. I don't think it's unethical in the long run. I do think it'd be fucked up if you just go, okay, tomorrow all co-ops, right? Like I don't think that's what anyone advocates for, and if they do, they haven't thought about it. You know what I'm saying? It's more of a phase, a slow process, and if you have any holdouts after that, you replace it in, like, it's like any other thing. If you believe the free market works, then you believe a replacement in the free market works, and all the replacement would be as a co-op. And because people like to have money and they like to have more money, go, hey, if you work here, you will make more money. And the free market, according to capitalists, should work in the way that it works, and say that, okay, well, there's a better option, I guess I'll pick that. If you believe the free market works, like you're a capitalist and you think capitalism is at least effective in what it does in some way, you must also believe that would happen in that case. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. The only way it wouldn't work is, bureaucracy, crony capitalism, stuff like that, which would be addressed by the other stuff that we're talking about. So,
okay, so what are some of these steps, right? So you mentioned, right, sure, like for example, like Dow Chemical and like dissolving that, right? I highly doubt that we're gonna get to a point in society where you have capitalists and like rich individuals want to engage in these forms of systems, right?
Of course.
We already live in a society, right, where you can have 60% of a population agree on something, but that doesn't necessarily get through the government, right?
Yeah, of course.
My issue, right, is that specifically it doesn't seem like this is likely at all. I'm not a big fan of I highly doubt that like we're gonna get to these forms of situations where like you have like 60 or 70% of the population agreeing on like having a co-op, because one, private ownership seems to be somewhat powerful, and three, it doesn't seem like individuals who engage in like international trade and like economics are gonna be like in favor of this, right? There seems like to be a very
well, they don't have to be in favor of it. There's only like under 700 billionaires.
Well, but
you know what I'm saying?
Not just billionaires. Well, I'm not just talking about billionaires,
right? But that's where that's the big hurdle, is because they're the ones that are dealing in international trade. Millionaires don't tend to deal in international trade.
That's other nations, like any form of anyone who like actually builds upon like trade, right? Anyone who engages in like international,
absolutely,
business, right?
Yeah, that's why it's a zeitgeist thing, and America usually, because of the way that we affect economics, usually leads the way in that. And as they see a more efficient system within whatever, it's.
I don't think this is going to be more efficient on a global scale. I would act like it seems like when it comes to current economic theory that one of the basic.
But capitalism is the least efficient thing right now. It's like very inefficient. There's so much waste.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in the sense of like capitalist countries tend to be like the most they tend to produce the most output on the economic level when it comes to global economies.
Well, yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
But
I'm not talking about other economic indicators.
No, I understand, but before that, feudal countries led the world in economics.
Sure, and I'm about to explain why, if we engage in one of these societies, that this wouldn't be the case. right? One of
Okay.
the most important aspects of our global economy, at least in the U.S., is that like private investors from outside of the U.S. can now engage.
Of
We
course.
have remittances. We have individuals that are flowing into the stock market, engaging and investing in firms. That's been one of the most powerful aspects. I would assume and I would hope that if you want co-ops here in America, that you wouldn't necessarily let individuals from America invest in like other nations and their private firms, right?
Okay.
Because we want to stay consistent, right? Because you don't want them to be able to, in one nation, be able to like, oh, we're like we engage in worker co-ops, they're not exploiting our workers, but then invest in private firms in like Europe, right? Like I'd hope you'd agree to that.
I mean,
And if
you can do both. It's not. It's
well,
like
it's
being
not
it's
ethically
like being
consistent.
sure, but it's like it's like being a vegan and also being in capitalism. You can't be 100% vegan. You know what I'm saying? Like
Well,
you got to do your. This isn't a purity thing. I think this is the problem with these conversations. Is there seems to be this idea that if it's not this like pure form, if it doesn't tangle with capitalism in any way, then it's not going to do well. But that's not really how it works. You could still engage with capitalism through socialist things. Like we literally do that all the time. I just described to you fiber optics and stuff like that. It's not that different, and that's a huge project. Trillions of dollars are tied up into that. It's much more than we trade with some countries.
this is a very different in the sense because now you have a society, right, where you don't have to. We'd be fine if we did it, but we'd be weaker on the economic scale.
Okay,
I would
but
say
why
that
do we?
it's not
Okay,
like
so why do we care about something
what?
like strength on the economic scale when we would be fine either way?
I'd say because one, we want to probably preserve the American hegemony. I know
Okay,
how that's going to sound,
okay. So why do
but
we want to do that?
because it's either China or Russia after us.
So why
And
do we care?
if China or Russia starts engaging in like predatory like practices in places like Africa,
In
they don't
predatory
necessarily.
practices that we already do?
Yeah, but we have the ability.
we
Wait,
no,
let me
but what?
finish.
Okay, but we're the bad guys, sort of thing. Is like
No, I'm not saying that the U.S. doesn't act in bad like
no, of course not.
in like bad
I know
engagement.
what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. So we're the major nations right now, the U.S., China, and Russia, all engage in pretty bad things, right? And
Sure.
I would hope that we have the ability for the U.S. to say as the number one, because if we aren't, it's either one of those two, and at least we have some form of democracy, right? I would hope that we could change in the future, whereas in places like China, where you have the CCP, or in Russia, that has been necessarily
Hmm.
tangled to authoritarianism. That's something that we should probably keep.
Okay, so I have a question. Do you think that
Yeah.
American politics and the zeitgeist that Americans have in the world, insofar as how we communicate with everybody, social media, the impact we have on pop culture, do you think that none of this would trickle over to any other country?
I mean, it already does, but
Okay,
that's
I
not.
agree. That's what I was going to say. It already does. And so we already have a global system of people that are being radicalized by the failings of capitalism that already agree that a lot of these things are bad. It seems like we'd have a lot more than America. I mean, we already have Canada to the north of us that's willing to do much more what we would say radical things than us. I mean, we have a
I'm not
lot
going
of
to
places that
disagree
have
with
had
you.
capitalism for some time, because China and Russia were kind of behind the curve, right? And they're going through the growing pains of capitalism. You're going to have South America is going to be another one. Brazil is definitely something that we should not keep out of the conversation in regards to China and Russia and stuff like that. Brazil is going to be another one. You already have these things moving towards more socialist systems. It all works together. I'm not saying this is why I'm for slower change, because we are interconnected, but society as a whole isn't limited to the borders of the country. We inform other people the way that we talk. Like we have fans. I don't know how big your stream is, but it might be big size, might be small. Either way, if it's the biggest or the smallest, you will certainly have people in your fan base that are from other areas around the world. You're going to see them having friends that are from those places, and you're going to see this spreading. It's going to be slower in some places, faster in others. We're certainly not the first in the world in regards to this move to the left. We're going to be behind the curve there, but that means that there's going to be other societies. Oh, he accidentally bailed, I think. He accidentally bailed. Whoops. Where'd he go? No! Where is he? Just jump back in waiting room. I can't imagine he rage quit. We were having a nice conversation. Discord could have shit. That's okay. I like the conversation though. No, that's okay, Puller's World. There you go. Anyway, the point
Sorry,
is.
that's the wrong button on my mouse.
No, you're
Yeah.
good. You're good. I heard you click something and then it went away, so I figured that was it. So yeah, basically, it just seems like I don't think there's enough stock in how the global society in general works. And I know it's an uphill battle, and don't get me wrong, but maybe you think the change is faster, in my opinion, than it will be. Like, I definitely think we have to work with capitalism and change things over time. I don't think we'll ever get, in my life, we're not going to get to mandated co-ops for sure.
So yeah, so the point, so when we compare Canada, right,
Mm-hmm.
that specifically deals with nationalized and that deals with more like direct, like nationalized industries, or like more direct, centrally planned, right, in comparison to like changing the way that firms engage, right? So
Sure.
in places like Canada, right, even if you have like healthcare and such as, you still have businesses that can expand across the border, right? You still have businesses that will engage like in like free trade, right? But under engaging in forms of like worker co-ops, that can be much more difficult if we want to stay like not exploiting other countries, because one, you have because one, you necessarily, if you want to expand a co-op in this sense, would you not want to allow workers in other places to have like a share in your firm?
It's possible that that's the case, and then you would try to do that as ethically as possible. And I don't think any of these places, like I would personally like to see a situation where no matter where you make something, if you sell it in the U.S., the people that provide the labor have to be paid what they would be paid in the United States, and that would
Yeah, so
that would pretty much solve it. But like,
yeah, so that makes it a lot more difficult for firms to like engage in global
I
economies
think
because
we're
it necessarily.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to really super interrupt, but I think we're very tied up in the idea of how it works under like capitalist firms work. You know what I
Well,
mean?
even if we like, so yeah, sure. So this is more has to do with markets and the way that markets work.
Sure,
Um,
but those are tuned specifically to maximize profit, not take ethics into account.
so, uh, so even if we engage with the system that you're prescribing, this would still apply, right? So even
I
if you had
guess.
complete like worker co-ops, at least in the U.S., and you mandate them, right? You still have to be able to engage with other nations who may be engaging in capitalism or may not, right? So that's the point that I'm specifically trying to make. It's
Right,
when
I
I
know,
don't.
and I've already said that it's okay to do that. We already do that.
Do what specifically?
Engage with things that are unethical to try to make a more ethical place. Like it's a thing you have to interact with. There is literally no way to be purely ethical, and so making ethical concessions along the way towards a more ethical world is what's definitely going to happen.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. So sure. So how does us, right,
Mm-hmm.
allowing for um worker co-ops and people who exist in the U.S. to be able to invest in other private firms?
Give it like a
How is that
specific
working?
example.
So let's say a major one, maybe Ford, right? So let's say in the U.S., Ford or like another car company becomes a worker co-op,
Okay.
right? Mexico does not want to mandate worker co-ops,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that we're in the case where, like this car company is like, oh, let's expand to Mexico,
Right.
right? Expand to Mexico. They incorporate like should they incorporate like Mexican citizens into the co-op?
Should they? Well, they would. That's why they moved to Mexico.
That may not. So one of the
So
actually one of
so
the
so you'd go. So you'd have a co-op in the United States. Say it's Ford. You'd go to Mexico for some reason. Maybe I don't know why, but you'd go to Mexico for some reason to make cars in Mexico without having Mexican employees.
that's not the point that I'm specifically making.
Right,
I'm
I
trying
know
to.
you're not, but yes. So they would be folded into a co-op. Those Mexican workers would have the benefits of the co-op at their back. It is an American company, and if you want to do business in America, then at the point that you're saying that things are mandated, then that would be the case. Yeah, and then capitalist worst nightmare. You have a bunch of wealthy Mexican workers, and they're like, "Why are you wealthy? Oh, I work at a co-op. Oh, maybe we should do that." You know what I mean? Like it's
So the issue arises with this is that a firm is less likely to do this, right? This is like, even if we consider this unethical, a firm is less likely to do this in one of these systems because one of, like, we all know this, right? One of the major reasons why firms will go to poorer countries is so they can have cheaper labor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's why I was confused why you think they would export at all.
And this is also another point, right? One of the major issues that at least comes along in the US is that a lot of like workers don't want to allow for like expanding over to different seas because allowing for workers in those other areas, right, necessarily will outsource their jobs.
Right, under capitalism.
Even under, no, this is just under markets.
I mean, yeah, but so they're worried about that because they rely on capitalism for survival, right? And if you rely, you do.
I don't know.
Well, that's why they worry about it.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the point that they rely on that, but it's not just the fact that they rely on like capitalism for like money or whatever. It's the fact that they rely on markets, right? So
sure, under capital. I mean, you could have. So I'm saying the markets can exist, and you don't have to rely on capital for survival. Those two things can coexist.
So the point that I'm specifically trying to make is that one, this phenomena would still exist in a socialist market.
It could, but in a situation like that, we're also talking about borders and stuff, and now we're talking about the idea of, like, again, the dissolution of what makes a nation at a certain point, right? Because you're talking so far ahead in the future that it's not really something that we need to really discuss as we watch this unfold. But sure, that's fine.
This isn't necessarily this isn't necessarily that far out if we want to engage with like worker cooperatives. This is something that we probably have to take into account, like whenever we start wanting to do this on a mass scale.
Mandating it is definitely, and mass scale is definitely far off. Definitely, you're going to have co-ops in the United States become more and more popular as people become more and more affluent through it. UBI would certainly help a situation like that, but like to expedite the process.
Okay, so if I was talking about mandating co-ops initially, this is where the conversation should go, right? And specifically, right, if we want to get back to, if you don't want to go that far, that's fine. You don't have to address that.
Well, I just don't know what the incentive would be to move to Mexico.
That you just presented the issue in and of itself, right?
Right, but there's no incentive because they're not looking for basic profit. The idea would be that if we need more labor and we don't have enough, we would incentivize them to either come here or get it near the border, or just do the same thing we do here but have it be in Mexico because you need to make more cars. I can't imagine that's going to be the case. It'd probably be something different than that. But we're also coming to a point where we're going to run out of the need for labor, which is a more important discussion. But that's fine too. Like, because we're gonna, by the time we even get to this conversation, we're probably not gonna rely on human labor as much as we do now. I mean, we're definitely not, right? And so these large expansions of like heavy labor facilities, like big factories, stuff like that, are going to dwindle pretty quickly as technology becomes better and better. And so what the big discussion is, what do you do post capitalism? It's not about like needing labor in the future. I actually think communists fetishize labor too much, frankly. But that's because it was written by Karl Marx, who needed labor. He was, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution and shit. So,
okay, so when you just brought up like there's no incentive to do that.
Well, there's no monetary incentive.
That's the issue that I'm bringing up, right? So what I actually like, I think the thing to worry about when it comes to like mandating or even having a mass scale like worker cooperatives is that as a result of this, our global like foothold in the world would decrease, right? Because unless you want to engage with the world at the same time and everyone is like, hey, let's just all engage in worker cooperatives, which I would believe is highly unlikely.
Sure.
And I'm putting right here. Never gonna happen. Okay. This is something that would weaken us exponentially on a global scale because, as we know now, the economy is highly globalized, highly integrated, and this has been one of the major issues. Right, the U.S. can barely engage with like globalization right now, at least in the future. In comparison to places like Russia, like in comparison to specifically China, which is doing a much more effective job.
What specifically are you worried about us not being like? What's a symptom of not being number one that you're worried about? Specifically in regards to America, not in regards to China or Russia.
Well, that's the way it is. It's relative, right?
Well, sure, it's relative, but I mean, what are you worried America can't do?
It's not what America necessarily can't do. It's what other nations will do in place of it.
Okay, so again, this is the very Americanized American centric idea of we understand things better than other people. Like we're still policing the world. I still don't I can't get around that fucking mindset at all.
It's not like, oh, America's amazing. I think that America would do a better job at being the number, like the world leader in comparison to China. And would you disagree with that?
World leader. They would just have what makes them the world leader.
So one, they'd be the leader in like economic trade.
Okay, so economic trade in a system where we don't necessarily value economic trade in the way that a capitalist system would.
And that comes with negatives, right?
But why?
A lot. Okay, so sure, I'll come with the reason. Wait, I already kind of went into why that would come with the negatives. You want me to just lay out what the negatives are?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So, for example, whenever we actually look at disputes nowadays between nation states, states to be more specific, economics is one of the largest driving factors, right? Rarely do we ever see wars or conflicts that are just solely on the base of military. And now we've gotten to the point that the majority of like conflict between nations is engaged through economics, right? So, for example, that may be free trade. We can actually look at one of the examples with China, which was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, right? If we had actually engaged with that was just economic, that would have massively weakened China, right? But now, when the U.S.
Why do we want to weaken China?
One, because they don't. Okay, so that this is one. China, it seems like, will engage in much worse behavior than if we were in like number one in the world. Would you disagree with that?
What do you think is worse behavior?
Okay, so that one maybe like engaging in like ethnic discrimination in their own nation.
Okay.
That may be...
Okay, so you know China relies on us as a consumer base, right?
Sure.
Not sure. I mean, they do, right? That's kind of like...
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing.
Okay. Yeah, so what if we just go, no?
Just go, no, we don't consume any of their products?
Yeah.
And have a shortage?
Okay, so in this situation, right... well, we don't necessarily need China for it. The reason we go to China is because it's cheaper. But if you have a situation where cheapness is not a concept, you don't need cheapness. We have in a situation where you don't where you have worker co-ops, right? In a situation where you have labor that is not cheap, which means that prices would naturally be more expensive than they would be that we get from China anyway. What happens is you have, this is what you were talking about, like it doesn't address some sort of ethics or something. It seems we wouldn't be engaging in trade with people that don't make living wages in that way, in enough of a way, and China would have to go in some other direction for the most of their economic power. The reason we do that is not because we don't have the resources to make what China makes. It's because they're cheaper to make. The only reason we have the concept of cheapness is because we work under capitalism.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying? We also have 800 military bases around the world. Nobody even comes close to that. Like Russia, France, and Britain have 30 combined.
Okay, so that's kind of like a different point. So let's get back to the economics of China versus the U.S., right?
Okay.
If we already see the massive negative effects of like us just saying we want to engage with China, or just putting tariffs on them, right?
Because of capitalism.
That's because of markets. That's because of basic
capitalist markets specifically. Because under capitalism, we require cheap things that are made from cheap labor because we have a limited number of we have a small number of rich people. We have a large number of people that don't have enough wealth to be consumers in a market where everyone is paid commensurate. Like if China had much higher labor, right? We wouldn't buy from China. We would buy from somewhere cheaper, like Mexico. Or if we were the weakest, like as far as like labor is concerned, we would just make it ourselves. America is vast with natural resources. We don't need China's resources. There's like a very few things we actually need from other countries, and we're very fortunate for that, geographically speaking. But this is what I'm talking about. This is like it's the mindset of working within not just markets, but specifically markets where the countries that engage in that market engage in the kind of capitalism we have today, which is not the case that we are talking about in the future. And I understand why it's hard to get there. It's hard for me. It was hard for me to get there as well. It's still hard for me to get there when they start going really wild with even further left stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't know if people are going to fucking jive with that. And I understand. People won't jive with most of what I'm talking about today at all because it impacts them severely. That's why it's a slow process.
Okay. Just yes or no. Are you a protectionist by chance?
I would prefer largely protectionist. I mean, obviously there's situations where you can't be, but I mean.
Okay. So with the example that you just brought up, I think that's a very, I don't want to say naive. I would probably put it as like kind of a naive answer to say that we can just like not engage with them. Because even when it comes to our own local firms, as I mentioned, we already saw the small effects of even having tariffs. It wasn't, and if we actually want to talk about the ethics, I assume you're some form of utilitarian, right?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Even if we look at like the ethics at home, right? Sure. No, actually not even sure, but inherently prices would go up. Prices for firms who actually want to buy materials would go up. You'd have massive shortages in the nation. And you mentioned earlier, right? You were talking about
this.
How, like, sometimes. Do you disagree with what I just said?
I do, and it's because
I mean, I have all of the empirical evidence that supports my position. If you want to see it,
I believe you do. It's under the concept. Okay, all right. This is a broader subject. This is a much broader subject, and I don't know how I'm going to get you to even get to here. Money, it doesn't exist. It's not real. It's a thing that we agree is real in the same way that we agree borders are real. It's and if you're America, we have a very specific different situation than most other countries on the planet. If America says, "Hey, what you're doing, I don't recognize," it stops being a thing, like pretty much in general. And I know it's weird to talk about it that way. This is just like long term, like it's really hard to discuss this if you keep framing it under like how it operates today. I agree. If today we implemented all of those things in one broad sweeping thing, it would not work. I absolutely agree with you.
So, what's the next step?
What's the next step?
Right now.
There's not one next step. There's other next steps.
Could you give me like an example of some of these next steps?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So you can wait specifically in co-ops or
sure in relation to co-ops.
Well, it doesn't have to be specifically in relation to co-ops. It's just specifically in relation to just how the markets work in general.
Sure, yeah, growth markets. Yeah, that's fine. That's probably a better way to look at it.
Okay. So in general, you'd start with what's a broad market that we can socialize, right? Healthcare is a great example of this because it also includes big pharma, which is trillions of dollars of money that move through the nation. So that's a great example of something that you could socialize overnight, and it would be just fine. You could socialize. I mean, education is the next big one. Unionizing a bunch of things. There's just so many things. I've literally laid them out before. It has to be incremental steps. You can do a lot of these things overnight. Education, that you could do housing, you could do food, you could do probably do internet. You could do a lot of those stuff. The larger systemic things are going to take time to unwind because of, again, the way that we are in a global market. I agree with that. It's just I don't agree that it's a wall that is insurmountable. It doesn't make any sense because it's a totally different mindset.
Okay.
So like, what shortage are you worried about if we don't engage with China specifically?
Oh, major manufacturing.
Sure, manufacturing.
Like steel, that's a massive one. Steel is like
Chinese steel. Absolutely, we can get it from Mexico as well. Mexico does pretty good steel, but we also do steel. We have steel.
Yeah, but not so. One of the aspects of this that's really dangerous is it's not just we can't buy steel. It's that firms that will actually create output that will engage on the global scale also need steel too. As I mentioned, we're completely interconnected.
Yeah,
right? So
we are absolutely.
So like that'd be other forms of like manufacturing as well. I think China makes like a lot of like clothing, right? All that, like things like that. A lot of like the stuff that
Right.
we see is made in China, and to us as a consumer, we enjoy those lower prices, right? But that's
You
a,
keep
I
going
mean,
back to
that
prices, bro.
prices matter in our
But
current
we're not.
economy.
I don't know how to break you out of the cycle. Maybe
No,
someone's.
you were
May,
talking about the future earlier. Now we're talking
I
about
know.
like current, right?
I'm just saying.
Or are we not talking about
Right, but I'm
current?
just saying like that's literally the point. Is it doesn't matter, right? Because all you have to
Prices
do.
don't matter.
Because you can understand from an economic standpoint when you just stop with like trying to do the idea that we have a finite amount of like capital resources, because we don't. It's pretend. We have a finite like other resources, sure. And the reason that we I know you're exasperated because scarcity would drive up the price of something under capitalism. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Otherwise, it's distributed according to need and necessity. It's like I know it's hard to get out of that mindset, and it's rough, but it's literally just a made up thing. Prices are a fabrication
baby bird. Good
that
call.
was necessary for some time, but we're getting to the point like where that's not necessary. There's also the question of greed and how much that rises prices, which is a lot. There's I mean the question of hoarding. There's a question of playing the different markets based on when you want to sell, like waiting for other shortages affecting markets in other places through shitty trade deals and shit like that. Like all of this can be addressed by understanding that if so the American people as a federal government that is going towards let's say full-blown communism, anarchism, whatever, as you go towards that, as you move away from the mindset of capitalism, the federal government can provide that.
Federal government can provide that, like all those like resources and such as.
Well, yeah, we have those natural. Again, we are in a very unique situation where we can do that in America because we have a lot of those resources. And again, even if you can't get that from just America, the idea that we would be like alone in a vacuum where there wouldn't be other places to get ethically sourced steel, I guess, which is what we're talking about. Like it's you could go to Canada, you can go to South America, you can go to anywhere. There's steel's a lot of places. Well, iron, I guess, but this is I mean it's not hard to understand that China isn't a market we need. It's a China that we use because it's cheap. Same thing with Mexico. But it would be incentivized long term as America shifts to acquiesce to America's needs to maintain relevancy in a market that requires American dollars to operate. This is why, of course, we could be a leader in this. I don't think we could accomplish this to the extent we need to if we were like Greenland. Although they have a much smaller population, so maybe they can. But maybe we had the population of us in like a Greenland with the historical power of Greenland. Not going to happen. It's a unique situation in the United States where we're trendsetters here, and it's like, yeah, and obviously you need currency. You wouldn't want to go to a barter system. That would be stupid. But
Okay, so I'm talking about economics in the current state. I don't really care about what's going to happen in hypothetical like
sure,
socialism stuff or whatever.
okay,
It
but
doesn't seem
the conversations about hypothetical socialism stuff and how we get there, and you're talking about like, well, what if we do it tomorrow? It's not going to work. It's like, yeah, obviously it's not going to work tomorrow.
You just asked, and I know we addressed that point, but you were just asking me, why do we care about China and their markets, right? And I was addressing that. And I mentioned prices, but you're like, oh, stop thinking about that. Sadly, prices do matter. Scarcity does exist. I don't know what kind of like economic theory that you're reading. You've just said that like
Right,
stop thinking in this like capitalist mindset. Just like go further. And it's like it's kind of a meme to a certain extent because you're not actually explaining why that's the case. You're just saying that that's the case.
Prices exist and get higher under scarcity under capitalism. You don't necessarily have to have more price, like a higher price, when you're not working for profit. Does that make sense?
You don't wait. So do you think that doesn't matter? Like, do you think profit doesn't matter for a worker co-op? Do you think like the prices and like such as like basic?
Wait. it will
It
right
does or it
now.
doesn't?
It will right now as we work with markets, and then you can move. What I'm talking about is as we move away from markets and shit.
Okay, so
If we were
you
to do
are.
that,
Oh, okay. So this is getting very kind of confusing. So
yeah, I can
let's
tell.
center this back. Okay, let's center this back. Are we talking about? Because I'm talking. You brought up why does China matter to our markets? Specifically addressing that. Now, as I mentioned,
Okay.
prices will go up, production will decrease as a result of a lack of crucial like resources that we need in order to create products that we may export, and scarcity will increase, right?
Right.
This weakens us on a global scale, and also our currency, the USD, isn't outside in the world as much because we're not engaging with China, and the Chinese currency will increase as well.
Okay, they can, yeah. So that implies that other people are going to engage with China at a higher rate.
It doesn't. No, all I'm saying is that the U.S. will not have the capabilities to produce and produce the goods that we need on the global level, because we don't necessarily have the ability to access the same resources that China was providing. So it's like, and even if we do, they're more expensive, so we produce less.
We overproduce.
I'm not talking about whether we overproduce or not in the sense of like, can we provide for our population?
Yeah, we overproduce. It's why we export. We overproduce. If we have a deficit, then
that's not why we export.
It's definitely part of why we export, is because you have too much of a thing you can't sell in your market. You seek other markets for it to get a better price because there's no market for it here. Supply and demand. This is only capitalism, though.
I'm not exporting necessarily has to do with the production aspect of this. Right. I'm talking about
it depends on what you're exporting, sure.
Not talking about the consumer side, right? So in this sense, U.S. production would decrease, right? So in our capitalist market, right, it's not just enough to be like, oh well, we've provided, right? Like, we've provided for the most basic of needs. We're done. That's not the way that current economics works. There's unlimited demand, and there's a finite amount of resources.
Mm-hmm.
And so the example that you brought up by just saying we overproduce, we overproduce. We don't have to care about if we underproduce. I think that's.
I didn't say we don't have to care if we underproduce.
But then I mentioned earlier how we would underproduce, and that's a bad thing, and you seem to disagree with that.
Okay, what are we underproducing? You're talking about fucking shirts.
In comparison to years before,
steel.
I'm not talking. So I'm talking about.
But why? It seems like you're stuck on a lot of different aspects of this, which is interesting.
So the point that I'm specifically trying to make is that we're not necessarily underproducing as to what we need, but what we're producing in comparison to the years before, right? So we don't necessarily just produce on like, oh, we've made enough food for now, we're done. That's not the way that markets work, right? There's unlimited demand.
We do overproduce food in America.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just bringing up an example. But for example, if we look at cars, like which steel is heavily used, we still make some cars, right?
Sure.
If we have to end up paying higher for steel, or if we just end up getting less steel, we'll end up producing less cars, end up exporting less cars, we'll end up selling less cars, or on the other hand, cars will be much more expensive, which is not good to the consumer, like to the American consumer or to the international consumer as well.
I don't know how you can say that and not understand when I say that you're really stuck on the idea of like supply and demand and like capitalism and how that operates.
Because I'm talking about in current society, and that's what seems to be the most relevant.
Right. So, it's inherently more expensive under capitalism, but we're literally talking about not that. So, yes, I agree tomorrow if we stop interacting with China, yes, tomorrow we will have a bad capitalist economy. Yes, 100%.
So, I'm saying...
So, why are we talking about that? That's not what even the point is.
Because you asked me that earlier, and I was just addressing that.
You think that I was confused about why we today interact with China on a market.
I mentioned that.
That's what you interpreted?
I asked you that
because I kept talking about the future with socialism. You kept being like, no, we got to talk about now. And I'm like, what?
Okay, so when I talked about this, I talked about, how does it work in our current day? And I prefaced that multiple times.
I don't know that you're very good at communicating this. I know it sounds like you know your shit, but it sounds like you also have like, I am trying not to be mean to you. It sounds like you have smart boy complex. Like you learned a thing and you really dug into it and you seem to know a lot about it, but you are incapable of understanding not that thing. It's like talking to a religious person a little bit. And I don't mean to be condescending, even though I'm definitely being condescending. I don't mean it. I just want you to try to see if you could unentwine your brain from the idea of supply and demand economics. Like, is it possible for you to eliminate supply and demand from the idea that is entwined with the concept of price? Because because it is under these other systems. It is. And that's a really big rub for a lot of people who are pro-capitalism. And I totally understand that you're in good faith. I appreciate you and I like this conversation. And it's fascinating. And it's just got to be a situation where you just entertain the idea, right, of profit not being the motivating factor of what you like to call a firm, a business, whatever. Profit is not the motivating factor. Can you understand that?
Yeah, I know a lot about like post.
It does sound like you know a lot about it. It doesn't sound like you can
No,
synthesize it.
Okay. Can we stop with like the condescendingness? Because I'm actually really trying to be good faith here. But
Yeah,
the point.
I'm not. I don't mean it in a condescending. I just mean it like that seems to be a hurdle. It seems to be a hurdle that we need to get over.
Okay. So sure, let's get over that hurdle. I don't necessarily. So I'll make this clear. I don't care about like some like idealized form of society if we can't get there or you can't justify why we should have it, right? So how would we get to that society? That's why I asked you the first initial steps. And when I did, you said that those were broad and that you didn't want to engage with them.
I don't know why I just said the words I said. I'm. You just went right back to it. Like as soon as I stopped talking, you went right back to the thing I said that was a big hurdle.
So there's no value in talking about that kind of society if we can't necessarily justify how we get there and why we should have it.
I've been justifying it the whole time, but we can't. You have to.
So that was the second part,
You have
right?
to make a concession. You have to make a concession for the idea, right? The concession to the idea that I make to you is that capitalism, and all the things that capitalism go in, like supply and demand economics, the reason that we need China, all those things. I accept that those are things that exist and that we need to know. Okay, so the concession here is pretend profit motivation isn't a thing. How does that play out? How does that play out? Just pretend. If it doesn't work, it won't succeed in the thought process, right? It's a hypothetical. That's all you need to be able to entertain to understand as we move forward, like the actual conversation about it. And then we can double back and go, okay, so then if we want to accomplish this, how do we get there? And then you can talk about it. But because every time you talk about it, the obstacle to the thing I'm talking about always comes down to, well, it's going to cost more. Well, no, it won't. Because only if we understand that that's what cost is. And this is it's just a different mindset. It's a total zeitgeist shift. And if you shift this and if you can't wrap your head around that, it's not gonna be a thing. And I understand. I totally 100% agree with you that we are very intertwined in a global capitalist market today. The thing is, as you move towards social programs, when in whatever industry you're doing, as you move towards that, the zeitgeist worldwide shifts. And we see that all the time. It doesn't have to be specifically co-ops. But co-ops are part of that grander example.
I'm going to do exactly what you say, okay?
All right.
So, hypothetical.
Okay.
Do you want to lay it out for me? Like, you mentioned, like, just imagine where this isn't the reality. So what is this hypothetical?
What is the hypothetical of not having profit-based businesses?
So sure. So like,
that's it.
you're asking me so what does that look like? What does it mean to have, like, not profit-based businesses? That's just, like, a very vague thing.
Okay, so it's it's less of a business, I guess, because you're not doing capital exchange necessarily. And this is, again, this is like more from a communist perspective rather than what I'm advocating for. But the idea would be necessarily that you produce goods that people need. That's what the point is. The point is the labor goes towards the needs. And you can also do the desires as well, especially because everybody likes their PlayStation 5s and stuff like that. That's also a thing that can happen, absolutely. It's just a situation where profit isn't the motivator behind the action.
Okay, so how do you distribute like the things that people need?
You need a thing? How do you get it today?
You go to a store and you buy it.
Sure, there you go. You go to a store and you get it. It's not different.
But what do you? That's a market.
It can be, sure, and I already told you I'm for markets for now.
Okay, so then is that the hypothetical that you like want me to engage with, or is that the foreseeable?
Okay, so you don't okay, so you can't comprehend a situation where a business would take whatever they make, say it's pillows, and another place makes milk. The pillow milk store. You couldn't understand a place that makes pillows according to need, and makes milk according to need, and then you go to the place and you get that thing without a capital exchange.
So it's just like the ANCOM style of like mutual aid contracts.
I get it doesn't have to be, but yeah, sure. You can't. I'm literally just eliminate all this other bullshit that you're talking about. Just the concept. It doesn't have to have a title. It doesn't have to have a name. You don't have to put a fucking. You don't have to know a philosopher that talked about this in the past, or you don't have to read a book about it. Literally, just the concept of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just. Okay, you have to realize I'm really trying. Okay, so we have a system, baker, milk, all that stuff. What's the incentive for the baker to like bake the bread?
He likes baking bread, and he likes people liking his bread, and people need bread.
Okay.
And in my situation, so that's broader communist stuff, altruism that I don't really think that human beings can achieve. In my system specifically, a system that seems to make a lot of sense is you would still have your markets and stuff that you like. And the situation would be that everyone has a basic standard of living through UBI or whatever, and then if you want to pursue a thing that you are an artisan in, or you have particular skill in, or you want to pursue skill in, and there's a need for that skill, you can enter that and try, and you are compensated based on that extra thing that you do for the planet. And everybody likes bread. Nobody doesn't like bread except for people that have specific conditions. Like, bread's fucking dope, and I don't think there's ever going to be a place in time where we don't have someone making some form of bread adjacent material that human beings eat. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a thing. People like pillows. People like PlayStations. People like these things. It's because they like to do the things. And I understand at a certain point it gets purely altruistic, which is why I don't think some of those societies will work long term. I think there will always be a form of market within there. I told you I wasn't a communist at the top of this. However, there's definitely a more ethical way to do it in a place where people... Specifically, the only real goal I have is survival and capitalism are disentwined. All you need is UBI, really, and then other things like healthcare and education and housing and stuff like that. But and then on top of that, the problem of automation is gonna force us in this direction either way. But
okay.
Plus, people do things for more than just money all the time.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
But the way that we use, you really don't think. So, okay, let's say I'm like, yup, hype it up. I like this hypothetical. I want to live here. Okay? That's awesome.
Sure.
How do we get there?
Okay, explain that shit.
You just wait. You said healthcare and like the government like doing like expanding like UBI and everything. But how does that deal with like our current market structure? How do we get from here to there?
Again, through slow change of changing these markets over time, you address an issue, you find an issue. Like, I can't tell you exactly what the next issue is going to be after we do everything that I and other people like me would like to take on. I don't know how like technology is going to change the ideas. I don't know how the responses of other countries are going to go. I don't know how I don't. There's just so many variables to take into account. You can only give broad answers to these things because you can't tell me in 100 years how capitalism is going to continue. You can't tell me in 50 years really how capitalism is going to continue to survive if you don't have consumers that are able to buy shit, right? So it's like how do you address that? Like, how do you address climate change in a scenario where capitalism is not necessarily incentivized to address it? They're incentivized long term, but short term it's a capital loss. How do you convince people to short term capital loss in a way to help their long term future? Because obviously it's not a thing that capitalists and enterprises are very concerned about. There's some people that are into alternate energy and stuff that are like, oh yeah, we'll do stuff. But I mean, like they're waiting. Why? We've been talking about this since the fucking 70s.
Okay. So just saying that like it's too broad doesn't necessarily address the efficaciousness of it. Like if I have an ideal society, I can think of things that will move me towards that way, right? And you're right, it's very broad. Right? You mentioned this is like a broad thing. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but like you just said that we'll just casually change markets isn't necessarily addressing any of that, right? If I just said like I want an ideal society and let's say fuck it, I'm an ANCAP or some shit, okay? Just this hypothetical.
Sure.
And I'm like, we'll just change we'll just weaken the government, right?
What's that even
What the fuck does that actually mean?
Yeah.
What does that actually mean?
That's
right?
what libertarians say all the time. I don't know.
Yeah, what does that actually mean? Right? So if you're just saying that like we just alter markets, what does that even mean?
Well, I didn't say just alter markets. I gave you specific examples of how the market would alter.
Okay, so was it climate change? Is that what you're referring to?
If you want to talk about climate change
specifically. So sure, for example, it doesn't seem like capitalism is going to be able to end climate change, right? But when we look at industrialized countries that are like going now, their energy intensity and their CO2 has been rapidly decreasing in comparison to nations of industrial before. So we've already been able to empirically demonstrate that it looks like capitalism isn't as energy intensive and as like releases as much CO2 as possible, like as much as they used to, which is a decrease. But I'm not saying that like it's going to be over. Would also say that even with worker co-ops, like if we transferred, like if you're okay with this hypothetical, tell me whenever you disagree.
Okay.
Even if we had a society where there were like worker co-ops, right? Like it was all mandated, and I'm not saying that like this is the position that like it's going to happen. You're right. This is really far out. Even if we had a climate change, these issues would still exist. So I don't know necessarily how just saying like, well. Do you want me to explain how they?
Well, no. Exist, so you say the situation still exists. It wouldn't exist in the same way. Climate change is always going to be an issue because we put pressure on the climate, right? The thing that is changing, of course, is the untangling of profit motive in response to the climate, right? So what you do there is because there's no profit incentive to do whatever is a negative towards the climate. There is ethical incentive to do the good thing towards the climate. Whatever that is, it doesn't matter. Just bad and good. So, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to not address a thing that you don't lose anything for and only gain, right? Human beings are very good at specifically greed. We're very good at that. And if you disincentivize, or if you unentangle the greedy aspect of money because it's so entwined with survival, if you unentwine that from something like a climate change or a healthcare or a prison or any of that stuff, what tends to happen is you do the ethical thing because we're also greedy for just how we live, right? Like I can't imagine if there's no profit motive for private prisons, for example. There tends to be a situation where you end up with a much better policing, or I guess an incarceration situation that would focus on non-recidivism, would focus on reform, because right now it's not focused on reform because it's roughly $153 per prison in private prisons, which is $1 billion industry. So it's just stuff like that where you just unentwine the profit motive and you can easily see the pathway for which that we should travel. And of course, if we address climate change in a good way, it helps capitalism, it helps markets, and it helps the aspects of capitalism that we keep for however long that stays, which is probably a long time.
Okay, so I agree with that point, right? But at least with the example that you've given, that's centrally planning these things now,
You
right?
don't necessarily have to centrally plan it, but I mean, like,
Well, with the example that you just
some
gave,
things
that
are
makes
centrally
sense.
planned. It doesn't mean it's a central plan. Like, it doesn't mean broad sweeping central planning.
I'm
Like the idea that the federal government does a thing is in fact the plan comes from the center. So
okay, so that's not. So I was just giving with the example that you brought up, right?
yeah.
I'm trying to get to this like very cool hypothetical, right? So you mentioned the example that you brought up was at least with
All right,
prison.
I got a piece so bad. 17 minutes is the timer. Just midnight Eastern. Okay.
That's fine.
Yeah. I mean I'm only doing a pee dance here, so but that's okay. We'll keep going for now.
Sure. I'll try to wrap this up. So you brought up an example of like federal prisons. That was an example. You know, you centrally plan. I'm not necessarily against all like central planning, right? Like I like having roads centrally planned. So I want to have some form of expansion
Yeah,
of
there's
like
aspects of
federal
central
government
planning that I think we
Sure.
both agree are beneficial. Yeah.
Sure. So that's a point that I'll agree with you on. But like with like getting towards that society, right? I want to figure out where we disagree, right? So like you brought up like just people doing it out of like the good of their hearts, right? So
Well,
what's like you said what's good and bad, right? People would want to do it like on the basis
right.
of
I
like,
wouldn't use the altruistic stance. I would say that there's a need in the market and there's people that are good at that and then they get compensated a little bit more for it because again, I agree that markets will exist for a long, long time moving forward. I'm not even necessarily anti-market, like we established at the beginning. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't just be out of the goodness of their heart, but I mean, people like doing certain things. People have passions for certain things and they'll follow them through. It's not like we're like in a purely communist society. You're still gonna have gourmet chefs. You're gonna have people making artisanal chairs. You're gonna have people making art and shit like that. The problem might be finding someone to I don't know, massively distribute vehicles or something like that. And then in that case, you can be like, okay, well, we'll incentivize that in some way, and that's fine. If you have a problem somewhere, trash is a great example of things that get brought up. It's like the Rhodes meme of communism. Well, who's taking out the trash, right? And Rhodes to libertarianism. All you got to do is incentivize that person to do it, and however that manifests is fine. Even if it is through altruism, it could happen. But I wouldn't count on it, and I never would. Counting on the virtue of human beings is not smart.
Okay. So you brought up an example, right? Like, I don't know if this conversation's like going as successful. That's completely okay. But like you brought up an example, right? Of like, you know, you brought up like the trash man, right? The way that we currently incentivize them is like, I would hope that if someone doesn't want to do a job, we like raise how much we pay them. Would that still exist in your society? Like, would that be an incentive?
In the one that I advocate for, yes, they make $13 an hour.
Sure.
Almost 14. Almost 14. Average is 13.71. We're working on it.
Okay.
That doesn't
So
seem like how many of you? I don't mean to cut you off. How many people though are like for $14 an hour you get to be a sanitation worker? Again, that seems entwined with survival.
Okay.
Doesn't it?
So, yeah.
Okay.
Sure. So in your ideal society, there are still people who get paid, right?
Of course.
So money still exists.
Sure.
Prices still exist.
Sure. I know where you're going, but
I'm like
right.
I'm not trying to like do a gotcha. I'm actually
well. No, I
100%
know. I agree, but then all you have to do is understand that like as a governmental structure, because it's again, it's a understanding that we can work in capitalism while also acknowledging that for the citizens that live in the country, like just getting to the point of money is a fabrication. It is not real. We can use it, and you're going to have to for a long time because capitalism has very deep roots. You can still, again, this is a situation where the ethics of working with China aren't really in question because we're still in a global capitalist market. We just have many socialized things. So it's not really a thing that comes up, right? So the problem that you brought up with China before doesn't really apply to this part of the society because it's before that.
Okay. I think this is a good time. You know, I know you have to use the bathroom. Okay, I have to use the bathroom. It's nice to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
You got some interesting ideas. I wish you the best. I hope your pee is great. I hope all the corn stuff is good.
Man.
Yeah. But yeah, you too, man.
All right.
Have a nice night.
Yeah, you have one too. Yeah. I like that conversation. Um, uh, there is a I totally understand. I empathize. I do empathize with the concept that not looking through a capitalist lens is a phrase we use a lot of the time. I empathize with not being able to do that because it does seem like a complicated problem, which is why again I don't advocate for. No, I don't think he was an ANCAP. He was a SocDem. He just is very, very, very stuck with the mind fog is a great thing to say, but I mean, he's clearly very intelligent, and I appreciate his time, and I'm trying not to be condescending on accident because it's hard to talk about this without coming across like condescension because I don't think he's not smart. I definitely think there is an issue with untangling aspects of economics that are solely manifestations of capitalism and then trying to apply those to a situation where we're not talking about how capitalism works. You know what I'm saying? So like, I don't know. I don't want to denigrate anybody that can't get over that sort of hurdle. Yeah, he's not. I think Polar is fine. I don't know. Does he have a what's his? I don't know what his. Someone said they watch his streams from time to time. That's cool. Is there like a big community there? I've never encountered it. I don't know. I don't think he was asking bad questions. I think he was asking the wrong questions. But yeah, he seemed comfortable in front of a microphone, which is nice. I don't usually get to experience that. Thanks for all the people that followed during the. Yeah. There's not a very good understanding of. There's a very good understanding of capitalism. There's not a very good understanding of how not to capitalism, and I think that's because there's a very good understanding of capitalism. Does that make sense? They sort of inform each other. It's like having a really it's like being a theologian, like a priest, right? You're a priest for years. Really rare you're going to be an atheist if you're a priest. You know what I'm saying? Even though you're talking about the same shit. And yeah, it's really hard for people to get past money as a motive to do things. I agree. It's again just entertaining the idea of disincentivizing capital, or I guess disentwining, not disincentivizing, unentwining capital from survival. It's really, really, really easy once you can make that step, in my opinion. If you are like, okay, I don't need money to survive, what are you going to go do? You know what I mean? Like, what's the rest of your life look like, in your opinion? Like, what do you want to go do? And so if you don't have profit motive, are you going to be a baker? Do you like baking? You might be a fucking dope baker. And in this case, in the case that I'm talking, we're not talking about like having no markets or having no profit. There is compensation for those that choose to work. Sure. Totally happy with that. But you'll never have a bad life. You'll never have a shitty life if you can't work. You'll still have money. UBI is a thing, so you still have... And we're not talking about, oh, I got to pay rent. I got to pay for food. Nope. That's all good to go. You might have to pay for, like, you know, like that gourmet chef I brought up. You may have to pay that person, but you don't have to pay for, like, chicken. You don't have to pay for broccoli. You don't have to pay for food. You're not going to go hungry. You don't have to pay for shelter. You can upgrade to a thing that is a bigger, better shelter if you'd like. Fine with that. If you want a bigger house, go out and try to do your best and get a bigger house. I'm 100% behind people's aspirations to have more stuff. Now, there's a cap, of course. I don't know what that cap would be. Today, I'd put that cap around 500 million, maybe less. I don't really think you need 500 million, but you know, that it seems like I don't. At least cutting billionaires in half seems like a really good starting place. We can tune up or down from there. You know what I'm saying? Like 100 mil is definitely. I mean, several million is enough. I'm just saying. And the guy selling gourmet food won't have to charge as much because all his base needs are met. This is exactly right. Yes, thank you, Timmons. We couldn't get there with this conversation, but that's the point. Prices are driven down because you don't need as much money to survive. And I wish I would have said that, except we wouldn't have gotten. I don't know that we would have gotten there anyway. So like it just. I don't know. There's just seems to be this mental block, and that's fine. And maybe he'll come around. Cutting billionaires in half. Well, more like eighths. Not that I would. I'm just kidding. But not literally. Of course, we would never do that. Cutting their wealth in half. Yeah, I don't think he would have followed, but that's okay. That's okay. He doesn't have to follow. I don't think that guy's a bad guy. I think he probably advocates for fine things. And in the long term, I don't think he's going to win that one. Capitalism doesn't seem to have a survival mechanism because it's greed based. And you can only have so much greed before everyone that didn't succeed vastly outnumbers you, and they, 1/8. So I just think that. And neither one of us are going to live this long enough to see any of that shit. It's unentangling the mindset that capitalism instills in you. When I was first asking questions about like non-capitalism, because I came from a conservative father who taught me that capitalism was a good thing and communism was a bad thing. Now, I didn't like my dad that much, as you may or may not know. So I was like, that's a little sus after just a little bit of time. Little sus. Why is that? Why is that? It just doesn't... It doesn't work in the same way. Like, there's this idea that there's just a bunch of lazy grifters that just coast on American dollar, UBI, in this sort of system. Who does that? How many of you are really going to stay home and do nothing? You've stayed home and done nothing most of this year. Did you enjoy it? Very few people actually enjoyed it. What you probably would do is pursue something you like. You might not. If you pursue something you like and it happens to be at home, great. But there's some people that fucking hate it, and that's okay too. Both of you are valid, and both of you fucking exist. And it's not really close to 50% of people that don't want to do fucking anything, right? Even if it's gardening, even if it's making art, you're providing something of value to society, whether you provide value or not. That's going to blow your fucking mind because you are valuable. Your contribution is valuable in whatever way it manifests, whether you're just a good neighbor or whether you're a good person. Like, it doesn't matter. So it just has to get to the point where you don't have to survive under capitalism. You can still interact with capitalism. You can opt into capitalism, basically. I'm giving you more freedom again. You can opt into capitalism. How about that? It's an opt-in. When you get to this portion on YouTube of Door Sharing is my friend, hell yeah, Argonian bum, and now it's in the video. It's basically it. You want more freedom. Well, now I'm going to opt into capitalism. I'm going to join the market. I'm going to join the workforce. In whatever way that manifests, I'm going to go to college because it's free, and you can get the education, whatever passion drives you. And if there is more money in it, great. If there's not much more money in it, fine. You're doing something you love every single day, and also you are fine. You have a home. You have food. You have your family. You have extra things. You still, like, personal property still exists. You're playing your video game. You know what I'm saying? Like, Anyway. Does any, like, it's just wild. Surviving is a big deterrent when it comes to trying things you want. I would argue innovation is stifled by capitalism due to that very same fact. If you fail, the odds that you can fail a second time at something grand, like a really big innovation, is pretty low. Because you have to invest money, which you need for survival. You have to invest time, which you need to spend making capital for survival. You need to invest brain time, like just thinking, whereas under capitalism that you need to probably focus on other things for survival. If you don't have survival at the back of you, with a gun to your head, there is so much more we can accomplish. Like, it's nuts. And just that, you could still have capitalism in markets. If you just take survival out of the mix, the whole entire zeitgeist goes crazy. And we just, like, everyone's got everything they need all the time. Poverty goes out the window because you can't be, you can shoot, again, you can opt into poverty, more freedom. No one's forcing your hand here. The only thing you're forced to do is pursue what you love. Actually, you're not. You don't have to pursue shit. What are you forced to do under this system? Not kill people? Like stuff that you're already, like, that makes sense to not be forced to do? You know what I'm saying? I believe 1.2 million jobs evaporate. Maybe. I don't even know what that's in reference to. I definitely want to write, but I'm so scared of capitalism devouring me. I want it so bad, but I'm so afraid. Hopefully you also write in spite of capitalism. You still put that pen to the paper, your fingers to the keyboard, or however it manifests. Still hope. I just didn't see the before thing. PVT. Hopefully you're still trying to pursue that passion. Even though you can't pursue it in the way that you desire to. You know what I'm saying? Market socialism. You may have a crumb of capitalism as a treat. Exactly. That's really what it is. And only if you want the treat. Maybe you're watching your cows. You know what I'm saying? Maybe you're watching your cows. You don't want that treat. That's totally fine. I really got to pee, chat. So I really like talking to you though. I told you I would give you 2 more minutes.